Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. I hope everyone is safe and dry on this stormy night. I'm Sandy Landman. I'm with the Friends of the East Brunswick Environmental Commission. This program is part of our Option Green series. Some of you may have attended some of our previous programs. The Friends of the East Brunswick Environmental Commission, or Friends EBEC as we call it, is a nonprofit organization in the township, and we do a number of different programs. You can see them on this slide. They include Free Cycling Day, which we just had recently, EB Grow, which is the seed library that we do in partnership with the library, and Melissa Hosick of the library is wonderful at running that. We have the community garden, which is right near the library. It's also a great project. The plastic-free EB is something that we've been doing, but I think the state's moved ahead on that subject, on that issue. And you might be familiar with the salamander migration, which happens a few months from now in early spring or late winter, whatever, where we protect the salamanders that cross Beekman Road to get to the vernal pools. So tonight, I am really pleased to welcome a speaker whom I've been trying to get for over a year, but with her busy schedule and a lack of dates that we could that we're going to work, we had to wait a year for her, but I'm sure it's going to be worth it. The reason I'm so excited about Heather is because I saw this program, or a program similar to this, she's about the watershed, and I was really fascinated by it. And I thought it would be a great program for the Option Green series to learn all about the Raritan watershed. But first, a little about Heather. Heather has a Ph.D. from the Blaustein School of Urban Planning and Policy. I mean, I'm saying that wrong, but and she also teaches at Rutgers. And I understand that this program is happening during her class, so we may have some Rutgers students joining us tonight. She is a founding principal of Global Metrics, LLC, an urban planning firm that's based in New Brunswick. And she's also the founder and president of the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership, which I know is near and dear to her heart, and she's going to be talking about that tonight. It is New Jersey's newest watershed association. She believes that the most enduring solutions to difficult societal problems are best addressed through community engagement and collaboration of diverse partners. And tonight she's going to discuss the history of the Lower Raritan watershed from colonial times, and also the industrial development that led to its current status. And she's going to provide a snapshot view of the health of the streams and tributaries, some of them in East Brunswick, that feed into the Raritan River, and the history of all the pollutants, which we should learn about, in the river, and how cleanup is going. So I'm going to turn this over to Heather. When she's finished, we'll take your questions and we'll tell you a little bit about our next program coming up next month. But Heather, you're on.
Hello, thank you very much. I am always so incredibly impressed with the East Brunswick Environmental Commission, the Friends of the East Brunswick Environmental Commission. I mean, you folks just are tremendous stewards and real, you kind of carry the torch for the other environmental commissions in the watershed. And we're just, always so pleased to see what you're doing, and so pleased to be inspired by what you're doing. Just bear with me for a minute. I'm trying to, I had an easier time sharing my screen just a minute ago, and now I'm struggling to get that share working. Let's go here. Can you see my screen? Great. So, well, thank you to Sandra, thank you to Melissa, thank you to everybody here who hanging out online on a sort of rainy, a little soggy Tuesday evening. The LRWP, it was formed in part to think about rainy, soggy situations in our watershed. So we'll talk a fair amount about the impact of precipitation on the watershed with respect to our future. But right now, what I'd like to do is, as Sandra said, I'm going to give you a snapshot of the history of our watershed, then discuss a few aspects of our current day environmental health, and conclude with consideration of maybe some of the scenarios, future scenarios for the health of our watershed. And I'll identify different ways that each of us can work to advance environmental health. And then if you could hold your questions to the end, then we'll have hopefully a robust discussion at that point. So just a little bit about the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership. We are 100% volunteer run. We are a nonprofit. We're 5 years old. We secured our 501c3 status 5 years ago. We formed really with a goal to address food security concerns. We formed in New Brunswick, working with a couple of different communities that fish for consumption out of the Raritan River. And there were tremendous questions regarding the safety of the fish, of the foodstuffs that they were catching out of the waters. And we found, as we were trying to gather data about the safety of the water, safety of the fish, that there just wasn't much information. And that inspired us to start to frame out a research protocol around water quality, around fish tissue sampling. From that, there seemed to be such significant interest throughout the watershed for a more regional approach to managing our lands and managing our waters, that we thought, okay, it's time for Central New Jersey to have a representative watershed association. And that's why we exist now. So we have a handful of focus areas. Definitely the bread and butter is the environmental monitoring piece of things. We do an awful lot of environmental education. We say it's K to gray. We have kindergartners involved. We have seniors involved in just a wide array of education opportunities, including a lot of civic science or citizen science. We do watershed planning. So we take that big picture view to how our land forms interact, how our hydrology relates with our land uses, and how our municipalities and our counties talk to each other. And we try to break down those silos and say, hey, watershed planning is really about how our ecology works, how our ecosystem works. Planning and development really should be attentive, less to some of these political boundaries and more sensitive perhaps to some of these ecological or environmental considerations. We work also to improve and advance recreational access and recreational activities along the Raritan. So we work to map and do wayfinding for many of the municipalities that are right along the Raritan. And then we work to bring attention to opportunities for recreation. And we work to develop and deliver recreation programming as well. And then another core piece of the work that we do is actual environmental restoration. Everything from rain garden builds to pollinator gardens to, you see an image here in the center of the screen. It says Concept 3. This is a large-scale restoration plan for salt meadow, salt marsh in Sayreville and South River that would be designed both for recreation and to provide access for birders and folks to launch their canoes or kayaks from areas that into the Washington Canal and South River out to the Raritan, but also to restore with the idea of really buoying our flood resilience in some real vulnerable areas. So some of you might not know what a watershed is. I'm sorry, I'm trying to advance my screen here. There we go. So usually when I introduce myself and I say where I'm from, I provide my watershed address. So that's, hi, I'm Heather, and I live in New Jersey's Lower Raritan Watershed. So the Lower Raritan is part of the Lenape-Hoking, the traditional homelands of the Lenni Lenape, who lived on these lands from the 16th to the end of the 18th centuries, at which time they were pushed out by colonists from Europe. The thing about a watershed address is it doesn't hew to arbitrary political divisions. So watershed, the borders of a watershed are defined by the high points or ridges along a landscape. So the watershed address tells a story about how waters flow within a place. So, and specifically about how geology and hydrologic flows define the shape of the landscape. So think about a watershed as a bathtub on the face of the earth. All of the rain, all of the snow that falls within the area defined by the high ridges of that bathtub flows to the same drain. So in this case, that drain is the Lower Raritan River, which then flows out to Raritan Bay into the New York, New Jersey harbor estuary. So our Lower Raritan watershed bathtub spans 352 square miles. Oops, I'm going to go back one slide. And includes parts of 54 municipalities. So it's defined by the Watchung Mountains in the north. So you'll see the high point here indicated with a yellow triangle. So it's also includes the easternmost edge of the Appalachian Mountains, also known as the Piedmont region, tapering off into the coastal plain. So our watershed includes Duke Farms, it includes Monmouth Battlefield, all of the water that flows in that area, that falls into that area flows to the Lower Raritan and then out to the mouth, which is flanked by, to the north, Perth Amboy, to the south, South Amboy. Okay, so an interesting thing about the Lenape-Hoking region is that geographic tribal divisions among the Lenape were often defined by drainage divides or watershed boundaries. So the need for watershed level planning to improve the Lower Raritan River and local stream health, and the role of watershed plant management as a strategy that works with the land is a lot of what we think that perhaps the original early settlers were interested in as well. So the original name for the Raritan River is thought to have derived from a branch of the Lenape people called the Narat-Akan, which may have meant river behind the island or forked river. So you get a sense for the role that landforms, our geology and hydrology played in our place names through that. So Raritan, Narat-Akan, there's some connection there. River behind the island, probably, talking about Manhattan in that case. So as these places were settled by the Lenape and other Native American groups, they created extensive systems of trails that still define aspects of our present day transportation network. For example, one of the most famous historic trails is the Assunpink, which derives its name from the Algonquin word Assunpink, meaning stony, watery place. So this is the trail that's circled in red that serves almost as the belt at the waist of New Jersey. So this trail traced a path between the Delaware River to the south and the Raritan River in the north. So now a roadway system, the Assunpink has served as a route linking Philadelphia and Perth Amboy for European settlers and their descendants. So George Washington used the trail during the American Revolution, and names attributed to it have included the Old Dutch Trail, the King's Highway, Lincoln Highway, and now most of it just call it Route 27. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the early colonial development patterns. So early European settlement in the Lower Raritan watershed was largely defined by farming. In the 19th century, industrial development took hold with significant changes in land use patterns. Roadways and railways allowed easier access to regional products distributed worldwide via the New York ports. Our watershed was a leading producer in hosiery, musical strings, playing cards, ice, refrigeration equipment, and horseshoes. So what we are looking at here on the screen is the change in natural land cover in New Jersey from the 1600s predicted out to 2050. So basically, the green represents the original forest, the aqua, the freshwater wetlands, and the red are coastal wetlands. So pay special attention to the cinch at the waist of the state, where the original Assunpink Trail, now Route 27, defined a concentration of settlement, development, and industry. Our trees and our wetlands disappeared. Here it's coming up. So they're just gone. This partially explains why we have such significant flooding and air contaminant issues in our area. So wetlands do a great job of buffering us from floods, and trees both clean the air and help with water uptake to reduce flooding. As development descended in this area, we lost our trees, we lost our wetlands, and we lost our natural ability to clean the air, clean the water, and protect ourselves via the wonderful benefits of nature. So today, the region is largely suburban, with former industrial sites along the coast being redeveloped as retail and office. The largest employers are healthcare, pharmaceutical companies, financial industry, and distributors of goods. No doubt most of you are hearing all sorts of stories about development of warehouses in the area. We are a major distribution center for the East Coast and globally. So despite some environmental protections, much of our green, aqua, and red spaces still face significant development pressures. So, and what do development pressures mean in terms of pollutants? So let me just frame this basically in two ways. When we talk about pollutants, we're talking about point source pollution, and we're talking about non-point source pollution. So with a focus on improving the health of our environment for people in the natural habitat, the LRWP focuses on cleanup and prevention of pollution of waters that result from development in industry. We can't do a heck of a lot with respect to the point sources of pollution. Point source polluters literally pollute from a defined source. That's either a smokestack or the end of a pipe. You can trace the pollutant back to the source, and the polluter often is either a polluting legacy, because of historically being allowed to do that for forever, or they have legal protections because they have applied for and received a state-issued permit to discharge the waste into the environment. So what we are looking at here is a map of known point source contaminated sites in the Lower Raritan Watershed, overlaid on a map of the major aquifers in the Lower Raritan. So again, you just look at that concentration, that cluster of polluted sites at approximately the waist of the state, where the former Assunpink Trail was, where our major transportation networks are. So I'm just briefly going to talk about what we need to be concerned about with respect to the future of our legacy polluted sites. What you see here in this image are our ongoing polluters, our point source polluters. But as I mentioned, we also have legacy pollution. Those are our historic industrial polluters. Our battery acids, our dumped waste from the 1940s, 1950s, our landfills. What do we need to be concerned about with respect to the future of our legacy polluted sites? So I just want to highlight one thing here, and that is the relationship between our polluted sites and climate change and the potential risk for our non-federal Superfund sites to become even bigger potential environmental disasters with the sort of laying on of everything from fire risk to storm surge, from sea level rise to flooding, that's both overland flow and sea level rise. And we have a number of incredibly vulnerable sites. So in October 2019 study put out by the US Government Accountability Office has identified 24 particularly at-risk sites within our Lower Raritan watershed, which is actually about 4% of the nation's total at-risk Superfund sites. And I've included the link here for folks to investigate that a little bit further. So we talked a little bit about the point source pollution. Let's talk about non-point source pollution. Now, non-point source pollution is really the stuff that we can do something about, as individuals. It's yes, absolutely, we can protest big industry polluters. We can push back against proposals for pipelines. We can push back against proposals for warehouses. But when it comes to our day-to-day engagement with the environment, we all have responsibilities too with respect to our contribution to these non-point sources of pollution. So what are these? This is everything from the outputs, the externalities related to our how we get about in our communities. As we move on our vehicles, in our cars, on buses, on trains, it's the brake fluids, the greases, the antifreezes, it's the road salt. It's how we tend to our land if we're homeowners. What do we put on our gardens? What are we putting on our lawns? Do we have lawns? Have we made a choice rather to have natural landscape that doesn't require chemical inputs? Are we leaving leaves where they are in the fall? Are we avoiding fertilizers and pesticides? Pet waste, do we clean that up? And of course, then there are also more large-scale agricultural uses, manure issues, feedlots, cultivation of crops. They all contribute also to non-point source pollutions. So the non-point source pollution is what lays on the land when it rains. This all gets washed off into our waterways, as this image illustrates, or it gets washed off into our storm drains, as the image on the right shows, all that litter in the storm drain. So non-point pollution results in poor water quality. So the LRWP does water quality monitoring specifically to better understand the amount of disease-causing pathogens in the water, the amount of nitrogen in the water related that triggers low oxygen levels, the amount of sediment in the water, which also contributes to low oxygen levels. The critters in the water need oxygen to breathe. Fertilizers, the nitrogens, phosphorus, leads also sometimes to algal blooms. It can kill fish between the compromised oxygen and the sort of strangling of our aquatic environments. It's not a happy place for our fish to live. And it can contribute to a lot of erosion as well. So the images that you see here are of a fish kill in Perth Amboy, an algal covered pond up in Duke Farms. And then a snapshot of the type of reporting out that the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership does every Friday after our water quality monitoring exercises on Thursdays. So we go out every Thursday, catch samples at 6 different sites along the Raritan. I saw a couple of our water quality monitors on the participant list, and many thanks to those folks who dedicate a day a week to going out to catching samples. And traveling from upstream at Riverside Park in Piscataway out to 2nd Street Park in Perth Amboy, catching samples, gathering information about water quality, land uses, other environmental observations at each of these sites. And then schlepping into Brooklyn with the samples, delivering those samples to the lab for analysis of the amount of fecal coliform, or basically poop in the water, and the amount of bacteria called Enterococcus in the water. And we report out every Friday during the summer months information about the amounts that are counted by our lab. And our goal with this is to inform users of the waterway and let them make informed decisions about how they will use the waterway, whether it's to fish, to jet ski, to kayak, to canoe, in some cases to swim. Yeah. So what you see here is perhaps a little bit of an atypical day. We don't usually see 3 green smiley faces. We usually see 4 or more red frowny faces when we go out monitoring. And however, we do usually see frowny faces up in our Riverside Park Piscataway location and our Rutgers Boathouse location. And for our Rutgers Boathouse location, that's a particular concern because, what happens at that site? We have, we know that that's where the Rutgers crew team leaves from, for practice most mornings. And when we're seeing fecal coliform well over the 104 colony forming unit threshold, here it is at 1,300 colony forming units. We can send a note out to our friends at Rutgers and just say, please make sure that you are showering after a fall or a spill into the waterway, because this is an issue. When we see things like this TNTC, that means too numerous to count, and our numbers are simply just that. We can't even get a feel for the amount of fecal waste in the water or the amount of Enterococcus in the water. And that's also a warning sign to us. Okay. So I'm going to take questions at the end. I'll answer all of those later. Okay, so I want to talk, start to make the link between the non-point source pollution, which leads to some of the problems with compromised water quality, like I just described from the last slide. The fish kills, erosion, the definitely compromised water for swimming, kayaking, potential bacteria threats there. But I want to make the link between the non-point source pollution and the development over time, specifically development that has hidden our streams, has made it so that we aren't even aware of where our historic streams are. What was the early pre-colonial, or at least earlier settlement land patterns with respect to hydrology, with respect to how the water flowed. So if you look on the left, the far left is an image, a map image of the Raritan River from 1893. And you have a pretty nice sort of veining of waterways in that map there. So a fair amount of blue. Then you move into the middle image. This is granted much more of a story of our forested areas, our green spaces, but you can still see that some of the waterways are being developed. Moving to the far right image, the Raritan River in 1995. What we're looking at here, all that pink area is really development, that has strangled a lot of our historic waterways. In fact, most of our streams and wetlands have been filled in to create space for industrial and residential development. So these hidden streams make us highly vulnerable to flooding and water quality pollution, because when we have open waterways, the land is and the waters are doing the job of flood control. The land and the waters are doing the job of making sure to filter those waters, to clean those waters. But when we develop over our waters, we end up with wet basements. We end up with highways like Route 18 that has to be closed relatively frequently because of flood issues. We end up, as we did today, with Rutgers classes being pushed online because of rainfall that compromised folks' ability to get into campus. So some of you might not know what a culvert is. So basically a culvert is a structure that pipes water either under a roadway or past some sort of a channel underground. So it's basically putting in an underground waterway. So it can be a pipe, it can be concrete. In some cases it's wood, in some cases it's sort of clay. And what we're looking at here on the top is a series of culverts that are directing water from roadways, getting the water off the roadway so that the roadway is a safer place for vehicular traffic, but moving that water as fast as possible into a subterranean channel. So that's basically a culvert. What we're looking at on the lower image here is a convergence of stream flow. I hope that the resolution is good enough for you to see that the stream on the right, which is flowing through a forested buffer. I hope you can see that that is a much clearer influx of water into this stream. This is two streams coming together. The one on the left is flowing through a culvert, very murky, a lot of sediment in there. All of that muck is the Nonpoint pollution that is running off from the waterways or from the roadways into the waterways and mixing with that clean water on the right. This is what happens when we develop over our waterways. We compromise them in one way or another. So let's see here. So not only have we culverted a lot of streams, but we've also simply just paved over many of them, channelized them in one way or another. I'm sharing this image here, and I'm so sorry, of a change in hard surface or impervious cover over time. So we're moving from 1995 to 2012. And with the darkening of the area, you're seeing an increase in hard surface from about 5% of cover of hard surface. That's asphalt, that's rooftops, that's other buildings, to over 25% of hard cover over time. So when you increase the amount of hard cover, hard surface, when you hide your streams, when you culvert them or develop them, you basically compromise the ability of the stream to do its job. You make it very hard for it to sort of take all of the water that falls during a rain event or during a snow event and get it off the land and clean it and filter it and take it to the Raritan River in our case. And what happens is, you end up with safety issues. You end up with flooding like we saw after Haida or today even. This image here is from 2015, the one on the right, and this was flooding that I could not get through to take my daughter to school. Her school at that time was the Greater Brunswick Charter School in New Brunswick, which is just up to the left in this image. And I simply could not get her there because the roadway was flooded out. So hidden streams, culverted or developed, cause flooding. They also pose risks to our aging water infrastructure. So on the left here is a photo I took a couple of years ago of a 34-foot sinkhole. Basically, this was a hidden stream that was buried over to create George Street. This was right at what used to be called Commercial Avenue, now is called Paul Robeson. It's right at that intersection of Paul Robeson and George Street. This is a very heavily trafficked area. A lot of students walk through there, but also heavy bus traffic, heavy other vehicular traffic. Heavy precipitation in 2018 of basically a culverted stream that was not on any municipal maps caused a 34-foot sinkhole. Interestingly, post Ida, this sinkhole is back. There are cones again at this location, about 15 cones around an area. There needs to be repairs again. This is old infrastructure that really wasn't on the radar of our municipal engineering department, and now we have to figure out how to deal with this aging water infrastructure that we didn't even really know about. On the right is a 20-foot sinkhole caused by a water main break. So it's not quite a hidden stream in this case, but it's other water infrastructure that is older. And once that's aging, we have to consider the impacts of what happens when it fails. Sinkholes might just be something that happens. And we saw an awful lot of those post Ida as well. Sinkholes typically related to precipitation, but also water main breaks. So culverted streams, hidden streams also pollute our waterways. So on the left here, what you see are several blue lines that trace streams that we found on historic maps that do not exist today in Perth Amboy. So we found many historic maps, looked to see what that historic ecology, that historic hydrology was, and then overlaid more recent maps on that to create a sense, to give us a sense for where some of those flooding problems might be in relation to the historic buried culverted stream networks. And in fact, I think what I could do here now is go through and put in about a dozen sites, a dozen dots along these waterways where you have flooding in the street. You also have issues where you have buried sanitary sewers. Basically, your sanitary sewage system is underground, and it's combined with our stormwater sewage system or stormwater system. And you have the combined sewers. When you have a rain event, you have stormwater displacing the sanitary sewage, and you end up with significant outflows of sewage into our streets, because our streets are now basically de facto streams. Our streets are revealing where those culverted waterways were, and the sewage is coming out through that. And we also have sewage now dumping out of combined sewer overflows, which is this photo on the right with the arrow pointing to its location on the Raritan River riverfront in Perth Amboy. And of course, when you have sewage flowing in your streets or sewage flowing out into a waterway, that absolutely poses a health risk. So a small handful of things we can talk about, ways to reduce stormwater runoff, to reduce some of the impacts of these non-point issues. So a lot of smart homeowner and land use practices. You can protect your storm drain, clean it out. Don't dump anything down a storm drain for sure. Don't think of storm drains as places for your pets to use the bathroom. We absolutely want to keep these clean. We can consider redirecting our downspouts onto lawns or using rain barrels. Mow your lawn less often, or perhaps even decide to get rid of a lawn entirely. Have a pollinator garden, plant native plants, and move toward more natural landscaping. Clean up your driveway. If there's oil on the driveway or other fluid leaks, sop those up. You can use kitty litter to absorb that and sweep it up and dispose of that properly. And be careful when you wash your car. Take it to the car wash rather than washing it in the driveway. Or wash it on your lawn so that the water and all of the salts and oils and whatnot soak into the ground and doesn't run into the sewers. A small handful of additional things for you all to think about in terms of things that you could get involved with as citizens. I talked about our pathogens monitoring program. We also have a stream keeping program. As I said, with the pathogens monitoring, we go out every Thursday during the summer to 6 sites, and we have volunteers dedicate a full day to doing that and helping us out. And then with our headwaters monitoring locations, what we're doing is really assessing the health of upstream areas, upstream streams, and trying to understand the impact of climate change or development on those locations over time. So we collect data once or twice a year for these streams. Folks go out and essentially fill out a report card for these streams. And then we can compare that over time. What is the temperature of the water? Is there more or less erosion? Is there more or less litter? Or is there more or less invasive species? Do we see development encroaching? Are buffer areas being reduced? All of these questions help us understand how well that stream will be able to perform and provide ecosystem services of filtering the water, cleaning the water, and providing for a safer, healthier watershed environment. So lots of ways to get involved in terms of providing input for future planning, everything from restoration to, I showed that image at the beginning of the talk of the South River, Sayreville, Salt Marsh ecosystem restoration planning. So we have regular stakeholder meetings to work on the design, to work on the plan for that. And then there's also an ongoing Resilient New Jersey project, whereby many partners, many municipal partners, regional partners are working to try and figure out real risks with respect to both sea level rise and overland flow, stormwater, and those risks specific to flooding. So the Resilient New Jersey project, you can look that up and get involved with stakeholder workshops for that as well. We have regular cleanups. We hosted a cleanup this past Sunday. It was a multi-site cleanup with in partnership with mayors of 6 municipalities along the Greenbrook. We often serve as cheerleaders for municipalities and support capacity building for mayors, for DPWs to start community engagement around cleaning up messes like what you see in the middle image here, that is of the Greenbrook. So we will provide support to them in terms of outreach and really rallying volunteers to clean up these messes. And then we also work with folks to communicate to others about the issues that are observed in the watershed. And one sort of easy way to do that, just talking about the amount of trash. And we love to get involved, get kids involved with going out to cleanups with us. And taking some of those trash items that they found and turning those trash items into works of art that then tell a story about not just the trash that's there and the need for cleaning things up, but also tell a story about stewardship and the power of service to make and affect change in our environment and in the watershed. We are, I talked a little bit about our interest in promoting access to the river and recreational opportunities on the river. In January this year, we started a pilot boat building program, and we engaged about 150 mostly young people in New Brunswick to build rowing shells. And it was tremendously successful. We built these rowing shells to provide an inaugural fleet for a youth rowing program, which we hope to launch next fall or next summer with area high school youth. So this helps us bring attention to the need for recreation, on-water recreation. It's an education for students, community building. We hope to have the students not just learning how to build boats and go out and row. We also want to have them doing water quality monitoring, on-water water quality monitoring with us, and bringing attention at a larger regional level to planning for public access to get to the water. And then finally, another way that folks can get involved is by learning how to read the cues, the landscape cues of a watershed, of our watershed. So learning how to understand your local landscapes and learning how to pay attention to the topology, to understand hydrology, to figure out where those culverted, those hidden or buried streams are, not just when there's a flood, but just by looking at where a density of trees is or where a depression in the landscape is. And by paying attention, through the work of organizations like the Environmental Commission, the Friends of the East Brunswick Environmental Commission, by then paying attention to those landscape cues and doing the right thing in terms of ensuring protections around those areas for the benefit of clean water, for the benefit of habitat connectivity, for the benefit of cleaner air, and for the benefit of all of us who enjoy protected green and blue spaces. So we offer trainings on how to read maps, read topographic maps, and how to basically figure out what landscape clues and cues tell us about our hidden streams. And we have one coming up on November 11th, one of these trainings. So that's pretty much it for what I have today. I would absolutely welcome questions right now. I think I saw one here. So why are leaves listed as non-point pollution? That would seem to encourage homeowners to continue to use leaf blowers and get rid of all leaves, which is terrible for pollinator habitat. It's very different from simply clearing storm drains from fallen leaves. And yes, this is a great comment. And I think that basically the slide just didn't go far enough. Leaves themselves are absolutely not non-point pollution. The problem occurs when you have municipalities that ask folks to blow their leaves or rake their leaves into the gutters for a pickup. And so many of those leaves end up in the storm drains. Really what we want to be doing is leaving the leaves, leave the leaves, where they fall in our yards. They provide just nutrients for our lawns, and they provide habitat for critters in the spring. And the habitat the critters that emerge in the spring are really the basis of the food chain for the birds, for all of the larger fauna that we love and enjoy in the watershed. So absolutely yes to leaving the leaves. Here's another question. There doesn't seem to be any public works effort to clear storm drains in East Brunswick. Homeowners rarely remove debris from the drains because they don't feel it's their responsibility. To what extent is the LRWP working on that? Also, there's a comment here that in East Brunswick, they rake the leaves into the streets. So first of all, I think that it used to be thought of as an inspired approach to rake leaves into the streets as opposed to bagging them and using up additional resources for bagging. That's really no longer considered best practice. We just, again, don't want to see those leaves in the storm drains. And one of the things that the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership is doing to bring awareness to this is, we've started a municipal stormwater management assistance program. We piloted that program with Highland Park this year. We developed a landing page on the municipal website that talks all about stormwater, all about how it is the responsibility of all of us to make sure that our storm drains are clear, to encourage homeowners to go out and, when they are tending to their lawn, that they should also consider tending to the storm drain at the edge of their lawn. It absolutely is all of our responsibility to take care of our storm drains. We have a number of municipalities that have regular street sweeping, whereby the storm drains are cleaned, especially in the more urban areas. You'll see the alternate side parking for street sweeping to come and remove the debris from the storm drains and from the street so that doesn't end up in the storm drains and in the river. We would love to see that in all of our municipalities. And we can provide all sorts of best practices information to municipalities who are interested in doing that.
There was another question. Is the flooding we experience now largely due to development and industrialization? Was it a problem in the 19th century and earlier?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if we go back to slides where you saw the change over time in impervious cover or in hard cover, hard surface, So the flooding that we have that's non-coastal is largely due to more recent development, really since the 1970s on. Since the development of, maybe even a little bit before that, with just the development of wetlands. There absolutely has been, flooding over time. It's just a matter of our tolerance for flooding. What does it mean to flood if a waterway is just going where it has always gone? And then you decide to put a home on top of it. Does that mean that that home is now flooding, or does that mean that the waterway just should not have been developed? So I think we have always been a very wet state. We are very low lying. We have the Lower Raritan Watershed in particular is really dominated by coastal plain and very almost at sea level landscape. So we have both the rivers and all of the streams that are flowing down to low-lying areas, plus the increase of sea level rise. So now we're seeing a lot of problems there, but we have always had a lot of flooding in this area. It's just intensifying in significant fashion.
Are there any other questions? Let's see. Well, I would like to thank you, Heather. I'm really glad that we were able to work out with your schedule, and if any of your students are attending, welcome them too. I'm glad they were able to see it. I just want to say that I learned a lot about the history of this. Really interesting to see the changes in development in the watershed and how vital the whole area is in the water. I mean, we've really changed our environment so significantly with development. It's a shame. I want to mention, just welcome Leedy Haramati, who's here. She's also a member of the board of the Friends, wave high, with the Friends logo behind her. This was a great event tonight. I'm really glad that we did have good attendance. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I'd like to invite everyone here, and we'll be sending out more notices, to the next program, which is on November 10th at 7 p.m., also virtual, and it's Exploring East Brunswick Parks. So we'll have Mike Reisner here, the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Services, to tell us all about East Brunswick's parks. And while you were speaking, Heather, I was thinking about the newest park that he'll probably talk about that is built on an old Superfund site in East Brunswick, the Fried Industries. Sure, you must have heard of that. It's probably a case study at the Blaustein School. It was very newsworthy the decades that I worked at the Home News. I know that, but it's been remediated to a point where it can be a recreation. So I'm sure Mike Reisner will talk about that as well. So there's definitely a connection to the next program and what you talked about tonight. So with that, if there's no more anything, Leedy, did you want to say anything? No? Okay. Well, thank you everybody for attending tonight. And this recording will be up on the library's YouTube page very shortly. And we'll see you again next month. Thank you very much. Melissa, thank you so much for hosting.